Okay, so we're now talking about 13 fundamental principles of Yiddishkeit. And the first one was the existence of the Creator. His existence is necessary and all other things are contingent. They all come from Him. And the second is Achdus. Oneness, whatever that might mean. And he describes it as follows. That this cause of everything's existence is one. In other words, referring back to the first Yesod, that there is a cause of existence, that there's only one. As I told you yesterday, the way we describe number one, you could hear number two also, but he's going to add some information to it. Now he says one. In what way, how do we understand being one? And he gives several examples of what it doesn't mean. And again, this is a Hebrew translation from the Arabic and the subtleties of the different categories, but I'll explain it in my own words. Not one like a species or a category, and not one like a type, and not one which is combined of other things, which then could split up into many different parts, and not one like a simple body, which is one in number, which can then also be subdivided endlessly. No, all these ideas of one don't apply. Rather, he is one with a oneness that is unique, nothing like it, in any way. And this is the second principle, which is based on the Shema. So now, a way of putting this is as follows. I said yesterday, and that's one of the examples that he gave. You know, when you say that something is one, and you're talking about some thing, in a certain sense, of course it's one. It is a thing. The Taj Mahal is one building. Joe Biden is one person. The United States is one country. When you say the especially, you're talking about one thing. We use a proper name, you're talking about one thing. So that kind of oneness is had by almost everything in the world. That's not unique at all. Now, you could have, let's say, a group, the presidents of the United States. That's one group, and it has its members. So it's only one group. There's no other group which is the president of the United States. But on the other hand, it has lots of members. It has a lot of people in the group. So we're not talking about that kind of oneness. A chair which is made out of 16 pieces of wood, it's one chair, all right, but it has parts, and you could take it apart into its parts. So it's not one in that sense. Let's take a body which has no parts. I'm not sure the Rambam thought there was such a body, but let's imagine a body, like for example, according to current physics, which could always change as it often does, a proton has no parts, an electron has no parts, it's not made of anything else. But each material thing has matter and form. It's composed of certain matter, and that matter has a certain form. So every material thing is at least two. Then if you count its qualities, you get many more than two. An electron has a certain mass, and it has a charge, and it has a spin, and other quantum properties, and the rest. So you still have some respects in which it is many. What he means to say here is that Kadosh Baruch Hu is one in every possible respect. In no dimension, no application, no respect, no consideration is any number other than one, larger than one, applicable to him. And that kind of absolute oneness is not possessed by anything else in our world. And he doesn't directly use the idea of uniqueness here. It'll end up that Kodesh Baruch Hu is unique, but that's just a Paul Yotze. It's the oneness of creating. Creation comes from only one. I suppose one might have taken the previous principle that everything comes from a necessary source and questioned whether the source couldn't have been a committee. But here we're being told that the being that is this so let me say carefully, the source of all that exists, that source having necessary existence, that source is singular. There's only one and not more than one. And now that makes the Shema into something very special. It's not trivial at all. It's not like saying the Taj Mahal is one or Joe Biden is one. It's this absolute oneness that the Shema says, not like I told you Rashi yesterday. And that is something which will be unique only to the Creator, and it is a complex concept. In fact, in the guide, the Rambam uses this oneness to conclude that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no qualities at all, because qualities would violate oneness. And if it has no qualities, that means you can't talk about him at all, and that's a big deal. That's not a simple idea. And maybe you noticed that I switched my vocabulary 60 seconds ago from saying he's one to saying no number larger than one can apply to him. And they aren't the same, because in the Morah he actually says you can't say he's one either. And you can't say he exists. You can't say anything about him at all. So that's a very radical conclusion that he's drawing out of the idea of oneness. And as we usually say in the Shema, the first word Shema can mean to understand, not just to hear with your ears. And if it's a complex concept like this, it's quite appropriate to say that you're being commanded to understand it. That means to think about it, analyze it, understand it. So that's the second fundamental principle. Yeah.
But we do follow that idea that we don't say anything about him. We speak about how he manifests and how he creates and how he produces, but we really don't say anything at all about, in a real sense, about him.
Right. So well, maybe I didn't make this clear enough, although I hinted at it the last few times. The Rambam in part 1 of the guide, chapter 50 through 60, goes through this argument in great detail, and in also other places, but there's the greatest detail. And he says two things. He says we can't speak about HaKadosh Baruch Hu at all. We can't speak about him. We can't say things about him. We can't describe him in any way. So we describe his actions, not what he is. And then he says we can use negative language. Now, negative language means that we itemize what can't be said. But when you itemize what can't be said, you aren't saying anything. So let me explain this a little bit. This is, in logic, there's what's called the scope of the negative, or the scope of the not. There's a difference between saying George is not bald, or saying it is not the case that George is bald. Or let me put it into the saying vocabulary. There's a difference between I'm saying George is not bald versus I'm not saying George is bald. The difference is that in the first case, I'm making a statement which I should take responsibility for, a statement that's supposed to be describing something that's correct. I'm saying he's not bald. You could ask me, how do you know? What are your grounds? Maybe making a mistake. The second way, you can't ask those questions. The second is, I'm not saying he's bald. I'm not talking. I'm not on record for anything at all. I'm not making any assertions. I'm not taking any responsibility. I'm not saying. I'm not on record. That's very, very different from I'm saying he's not bald. When I say he's not bald, I'm making a statement. You could take me to task. How do you know? Is it correct? Isn't it correct? The latter is where I just refuse to say. I refuse to put myself on the ground, on the line. I refuse to commit myself. That's negative language. Negative language is where, not for example, where I say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not ignorant, because you could say, if he's not ignorant, then he must be knowledgeable. And you're saying he's knowledgeable, you can go down that whole road. No, it's that I don't say that he's ignorant. I don't say it. I haven't described him at all. I just told you what I'm not going to say. And it's quite consistent for someone to say, I don't say that he's ignorant, and I don't say that he's knowledgeable. I don't say either of them. I don't say anything, because I can't describe him at all. So there's a big difference between the two. Is the difference clear, what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So then, this second half, this use of negative language, understand it correctly, means I'm quite consistent in saying you can't describe him, and I'm not describing him, and I'm just spelling out in detail the kinds of things that can't be said. But that doesn't count as describing him, not by implication or anything else. You can't have an implication from a refusal to speak. Refusals to speak don't have implications. Okay?
So then sorry, just when the principles are stated, that we are going through, the 13 principles, the believe element, I think it plays a very determining role in how, because it says we believe in the existence of the Creator, right? For principle number 1.
Okay, so I'm telling you that that's a loose way of speaking, because we can't say positively in terms of our concept of existence that he exists. But it's clear with the one. I started off by saying he's one, because that's what Rambam says. I'm telling you that in the Morah, the more complete thing is to say is, I can't say that he is more than one. Literally speaking, I can't say he's one either. But this particular verse, this particular denies multiplicity. And that's an item unto itself. It denies multiplicity. Right? But it's denying. It says, I won't say that he's more than one. Okay. That's number 2. Number 3 is denial of physicality. Now, this is complicated, and we're going to go through it slowly and in detail. I just want to tell you a little story before we go through it. About 10 years ago, I was in Chicago in the winter for a Shabbaton, and I had the great privilege of having Shabbos lunch with the Novominsker Rebbe. He was there with 2 relatives. There were only 4 of us at the table. And he asked us, what do we think the greatest contribution that the Rambam made to Klal Yisrael? So of course, nobody dared open his mouth. I mean, you can figure out the greatest contribution. He said the 13 principles of Yiddishkeit. Why? Because in the Rambam's time, there were educated, committed, faithful Jews who thought that God is a body. The Rambam writes about this in detail and writes about how the Torah has to express itself, because many people think that nothing could exist without being a body. There's a famous machlokes between him and the Ravid, whether that counts as being an apikoros. The Rambam says yes. Today, you will not find any Jew anywhere, of any stripe, any politics, any persuasion who thinks that God is a body. The Rambam wiped that out. He wiped it out from Klal Yisrael. The 13 principles, they had other effects as well, but you can see the gigantic effect. Here's something which many faithful and fairly educated Jews believed. And the Rambam wiped it out once and for all. That's a gigantic achievement. So, we have to take a look now at what he writes about this. The third principle, denying physicality. And that means to say, this one, who we described in the previous two, is not a body, nor is he a power in a body, or a quality in a body. In other words, when you talk about the physical universe, you have at least two different dimensions. You have tables, and you have blue, and metal, and strong, and light, and so forth and so on, which are physical qualities. So, to deny physicality to Kadosh Baruch Hu is not enough to say that he's not a physical body. It means he also has no physical qualities. No physical language applies to him. So, for example, the kinds of descriptions of bodies, what they do and what happens to them, don't apply to him. For example, motion and being static or stationary, neither will apply to him. Now he says, neither on the aspect of his identity and essence, nor as in what's called an accident, that means a quality which you might have and which you can gain and lose. In other words, let's take a dog. So a dog is an animal. It can't be other than an animal. If something were to happen to the dog that it stopped being an animal, it would stop being a dog also. You can't be a dog without being an animal. Now this dog might be strong, or this dog might be old, or this dog might have brown hair. Those are mikrim. Those are what they call accidents. This dog is going to get older, and this dog might lose its strength or gain more strength, and someone might dye its hair, its color. Those things could change and remain a dog. Being an animal can't remain something which is necessary to being a dog. Because Baruch Hu doesn't have any physical qualities, physical circumstances, neither mitzad what he would be essentially, nor from the point of view of certain of accidental characteristics. Now, of course, he doesn't have either of those types of characteristics, but he means to exclude this in terms of the general concept of how you describe things. And therefore, our sources deny from him both connection and separation. He's not connected to anything, and he's not separate from anything. Because to say that X is separate from Y means there's a distance between them. And to say there's a distance between them means they're situated in space. So neither connection nor separation is appropriate. And it says in the Gemara, not sitting and not standing. Not connection and not. I think here Pirud means coming apart, and Oref means being beat together. And he quotes it from a verse in Yeshaya. They pushed him off to separate him out. They pushed him away. He has none of these characteristics. And now he brings a proof from some verses in Isaiah, which I think is extremely important. He says, Yeshaya says, Ve'el mi tidamyun kel. To whom can you compare HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And another verse, but saying, Ve'el mi tidamyuni ve'eshveh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, to whom can you compare me, and I shall be equal to him? Now, this means he's absolutely incomparable. You can't say he's like anything else at all. So the Rambam says, if he were a physical body, then he would have similarities to other physical bodies. Even if the similarities are comparisons and contrasts, he'd be bigger than some other physical body, or stronger than some other physical body, or faster than some other, but still, that's a comparison. And that comparison would require that he be physical in some sense. Since he's not physical, well, put it this way, the verse says he's not comparable. It follows that he's not a body, because were he a body, he would be comparable. Now, if you look there in chapter 40 of Isaiah, the chapter starts by saying, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is like a shepherd to the Jewish people. And it describes the qualities of how a shepherd takes care of his sheep and cares for his sheep and protects the sheep and so forth and so on. And then it says you can't compare him to anything. So the careful reader says, hey, now wait a second. You, Isaiah, started off with comparisons. And now you say he can't be compared. What's going on? And the answer is what we said before many times, that when you say he can't be compared, that means you can't compare what he is. But when you do compare him, you're comparing what he does. Yes, he treats us like a shepherd treats his sheep, with that kind of care and responsibility and commitment and dedication. But that's what he does. So if Isaiah puts in the very same chapter, he is like XYZ, and also the statement he can't be compared to anything, obviously you're talking about two different respects. The first is talking about action, and the second is talking about essence, what he is. And that's what the Rambam goes on to say. Everything that you find in the scriptures of his qualities, and especially the qualities of bodies, you have lots of them. Like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is described in the verses as walking from place to place, or going from place to place. Shouldn't say walking, going. And standing and sitting on a throne, and speech, and others similar to them. First of all, they're all meant metaphorically. They're not meant, now I want to be careful, they're not meant in their first, most common, simplistic meaning. They're meant in a secondary, more sophisticated, minority meaning, which is found explicitly in texts. We're not talking about changing the meaning of words here. We're talking about words which, if you look in the Tanakh, have several meanings on the basis of certain different places where they occur, where the different meanings are absolutely determined that they have to have different meanings. And then when the word is applied to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you have to select one of the meanings. Not given to you which meaning it is. One meaning is used 60% of the time, another 30% of the time, another 10% of the time. You find the word applied to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you're faithful to the text, you have three choices. So, for example, if you talk about heart, and you speak about HaKadosh Baruch Hu's heart, and you say, oh, look at that. The Holy Scriptures say that God has a heart. A heart is a physical pump in the middle of your body that circulates your blood. Yeah? Well, how about the phrase that you find in the Holy Scriptures, Lev HaShamayim, the heart of the heavens? Are you going to tell me that somewhere in the midst of the heavens there's a physical pump circulating blood? Probably not, right? Oh, so heart doesn't have to mean a physical pump circulating blood. Heart could mean the central part, the most important part of anything, without blood, without being physical. It could be the central part of an idea, central part of a legal concept. So when you come to use the word heart with respect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're not stuck with physical pumping blood. You could use heart the way it's used in the sense of the heart of the heavens, something most central aspect, most central purpose, or something like that. That's the way in which he does it. This is what Rabbi Meisel taught me when he taught me the first 50 chapters of the Gemara. Now, and the Rambam says it's explicitly in every case where he uses a verse, a word which most often is physical, and he says with respect to Kodesh Baruch Hu, it's not physical. It's always because he finds some place where it's explicitly not physical in the Tanakh itself. So that's what he means hashalah. He means it's a borrowed term from the most normal use to one of its less common uses. And now he quotes a phrase from the Gemara, Dibra Torah Kaloshin B'nei Adam. The Torah spoke the language of man. And I must tell you, I did a search on this years ago, and if you look in the Talmudic literature, this phraseology is used for one narrow application only, and that is where the Tanakh uses a doubled verb, like Shomor Tishmor. It doubles the verb, and one opinion in the Gemara is not to read anything into the doubling, not to learn any extra special law or idea from the doubling. It's a phraseology which is natural, and there it's called Dibra Torah Koloshim B'nei Adam. People double their words, sometimes for emphasis, and don't read anything into it. That's all it means. The Rambam here takes it for a much different concept. It means that when you are speaking about something, you use phraseology which isn't meant in the most common simplistic usage of the words, but is meant sometimes in the more sophisticated minority use of the words to communicate an idea, even though if you weren't clued in, you might misunderstand what is being said. Now, I was looking for a source to find this in some Talmudic context so I could understand how the Rambam came to use this phraseology. I couldn't find one. But he's not the only one who uses it. Other Rishonim use it as well. So I'm just pointing out that that's what it means here. And he says, many people have written about this subject. And he says, this third principle, that God has no physical elements or parts whatsoever, is what is contained in the verse describing what happened to the Jewish people at Sinai. Ki lo ra'isem kol tmuna. You didn't see any pictures. Now, you have to sort of hear the way the Rambam read Psukim. You have to ask yourself, the Torah is describing what happened at Sinai. Sinai was the greatest revelation of the Kodesh Baruch Hu that ever happened. And you didn't see any pictures. Really? So what? Would you have thought that we were going to see pictures? And why is it important whether we did or we didn't? And in fact, other prophetic experiences have pictures in them. Sometimes prophets do see visions. Visions of various things. Animals and menorahs and boiling cauldrons. And so why would the Torah say it? Well, what's the Torah trying to communicate? Just like the footnote, by the way, there was no pictures. The Rambam hears this as a way of expressing a fundamental principle. It's not by accident that you didn't see any pictures. It wasn't that he was hiding in this occasion, but on other occasions he might show himself. No, it means pictures aren't relevant to this experience. Pictures aren't the right category for this experience. Because a picture would capture some kind of visual appearance. And he has no visual appearance. The idea of a picture doesn't apply to him. That's why the Torah says it. In the context of this greatest revelation, it says that there were no pictures because pictures aren't conceivable with respect to what he is. That's what it means to teach us. Kolomar. Now the word kolomar, although it's a Hebrew word, kolomar always means, watch out. You read something, but it doesn't mean what you probably think it means. In English, you translate it, that is to say, but you have to read that is to say as a kind of warning. You better say it not this way, because you might have misunderstood it the other way around. You didn't acquire any understanding of him as something that has a picture. Nothing in the revelation communicated itself in a way that he could be capable of a picture. Because, as I told you, he isn't a goof, he isn't a body, and he isn't a power in a body or a quality of a body. I think this is, although what I'm going to say now the Rambam doesn't agree with, but I think it's relevant to an idea that's found elsewhere. One of the things that describes the revelation at Sinai is V'chol ha'am roim es hakolos. Everybody saw the voices. Now let's think about that. They saw voices. Usually you hear voices. You see color and shape and form and so forth and so on, motion. You don't see voices. What are you supposed to hear when you hear the words? They saw the voices. And don't tell me it's synesthesia. In synesthesia, you hear the sound of a trumpet and you see red. The auditory experience is linked to a visual experience, or vice versa. You see red, you hear trumpets. And they figured that out because the wiring in the brain for the visual and the auditory are fairly close, and one can affect the other. There's a whole explanation for it. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about hearing a trumpet causing you to see red. We're talking about seeing the sound of the trumpet. So the right thing to do, I believe, in this situation is to say this. Number one, I don't understand those words. The way I understand saw, the way I understand trumpet, they don't shake hands. It's just not part of the same dimension at all. So the first thing that I say to myself is, if those are the words that Torah uses to describe that experience, I have no clue what that experience is like. Because in my vocabulary, those words are meaningless. And then I say, well, if the Torah used those words, and used those words to describe the experience, those words must have a meaning I don't know. I'm not aware of these meanings of the word. And if I had been there, I would also see that the words apply. But in the meantime, I haven't been there, and I'm being told that this experience was utterly unlike anything that I experienced. I think it's a very important communication, because this is the one time when the Kodesh Baruch Hu appeared to the whole to the whole nation in this guise, because they saw Kriyas Yamsuf also, whatever, but in his appearing to them and interacting with them, this is the only time that it happened. And since he is utterly different from the created world, it fits that their experience of him should be utterly unlike any experience of the created world. The two fit together in a natural way. And that's what we can get from those words. Something we don't understand, and that means we don't understand the quality of their experience either. I think that's a very important thing to know. Now, by the way, this means that the things that we say casually about HaKadosh Baruch Hu have to be thought of more carefully. Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is everywhere. As a 60-year-old sing it, well, not really, because to be here means to be in a physical position. And to be in a physical position, you have to be physical. Only physical things are in a physical position. And he isn't physical. So it's got to be something else. So you say, Rabbi, why are you talking about children's songs? What about the Zohar HaKadosh, which says, Leisa sar panui minei, no place is empty of him. What are you going to do with that? I'll tell you what I'm going to do with that. You agree, I take it, that what the Rambam said before, that he's talking about God's moving from place to place, and God sitting and God standing, all of those are metaphors for something else, right? You do agree to that. Couldn't the words in the Zohar also be a metaphor for something else? Or do we have two attitudes towards different parts of our literature? The Holy Tanakh, the Bible, which is partly or according to some, wholly dictated by God, and certainly inspired by God, there things could be metaphors, and they could be parables, and they could have borrowed meanings, and so forth and so on. But when you come to the sages, they speak like you speak to 6-year-olds. Everything is plain in the dictionary, and everything is exactly, literally what is written on the page. And there's no poetry, and there's no hints, and no nothing. It's all written for, pedestrian newspapers. Why would you think that? Why would you think that the rabbis would have a different attitude towards their expression than the Tanakh? Indeed, as Rambam quotes himself, Solomon said that Chachamim express themselves in chidos, in riddles. That's the way of wise people, to express themselves in riddles. So since our sages are wise, to the 100th power, that being the case, we should expect them from time to time express themselves in riddles, in parables, in metaphors, and not in the way that a 6-year-old can get it with a dictionary. And especially the Zohar, which is what's called sod, secret. It's not going to express itself in the way that a simple translation is going to give it to you. So Lesa Sarpanu Mine, there's no place empty of him, is not talking about being contained in a physical space. That's not its subject. What is its subject? Well, back to the word simple. One way to explain it, which you find in Ramchal and other Kabbalists, is that, and other philosophers as well, is that his will sustains everything that exists. And Rambam writes that in Mishnah Torah and in the guide. His will sustains everything that exists, which means nothing is disconnected from him. Nothing is independent from him. Nothing is outside or beyond his involvement. But not that he's located in physical space, in the table, in the room. That simply isn't true, because only physical things could be that. So when you find expressions in the literature, which in the rabbinic literature, which make it sound like he has a physical body or some physical qualities, you should take the same attitude to it that we take towards those statements in the Tanakh, where we understand, as the Rambam said, they're chashala, they're borrowed terminology, and they're not meant to be taken in their most common simplistic meaning. But meant to be taken in their less common and more esoteric meanings. Okay? Maybe one more, yeah.
I know maybe we've said it before, but I think it's appropriate to think about how free will, in the independence that sort of, like it's not against his ratzon whatsoever. But what's that?
Well, free will is, if I take it literally, is exactly the same. There wouldn't be any free will unless he didn't create it. He makes the power of free will just like he makes everything else. You're thinking not of free will, you're thinking of the decision, right? But he makes the power for us to create our own decisions, because that's what he wants. Without his giving us the power to make those decisions, the decisions wouldn't be made. Just 1 second here. Yes, another example of this usage of terminology. The Gemara in Pesachim says 7 things were created before the creation of the world. Now, I've mentioned this a number of times. I hope it's obvious to people. Time is part of the world. Time is a feature of the world. The Rambam describes time. He says time is very difficult to understand. There's a lot of confusion about it, because time is a quality of a quality. And he explains, you have physical objects. One quality of physical object is motion. Sometimes some of them move. And then you could talk about two different kinds of motion: regular motion and irregular motion. So the regularity or irregularity is a quality of the quality of motion. It's a quality of a quality. Time is regular motion of physical objects. That's what time is. This, by the way, is lahavdil very Einsteinian. One of Einstein's revolutions was that when you measure something, it isn't as if the something is there, whether you're there or not, think about it or not, interact with it or not, and then you measure it, and if you didn't measure it, it would be just as real. No, the thing itself is the measuring. Time is what clocks do. It isn't that clocks measure time. Without the clocks, the time is doing whatever it does, and the clock's measured. Time is what clocks do. That's what time is. So therefore, time is interior to the physical world. It's a part of the physical world. Now, of course, you're all nodding your heads, and you understand that very well, but watch what comes out of it. Then you can't say before the creation. Those words now become meaningless, because before means earlier in time, and time starts with the creation. You step outside the creation, there is no time. So there can't be a before the creation. So when Chazal say 7 things were created before the creation, they don't mean earlier in time. Even though the words use the word before, what they mean is these things are fundamental and everything else in the creation depend upon them. Without them, they either couldn't exist or couldn't function. They're the pillars on which the rest of the creation stands. It means before in importance, but not before in time, even though they use the word before. So again, you have to understand they're using simple language and they mean it to be understood in context to convey what's reasonable to convey. Okay? Okay. The fourth principle, which I'll just mention now, is kadmus. We'll have to talk about that. That also deals with time in a certain sense, and there are two different concepts. But we'll leave that for next time. Okay, this is. You should have a wonderful Shabbos. There is a levaya now of one of the greatest people in the generation, Yeshivat Ohr Solomon, which is going. It was the last time I heard an hour ago when it was announced for it is supposed to go out from the Mir Yeshiva here at 7:30. So I'm just mentioning it to people, and that's where I'm headed.